Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration ship U.E.S. Horizon, watching the stars through the main viewport. His crew of 43 humans had spent 6 months exploring the Kepler system, looking for new worlds that might support human life. The mission was routine, but important because Earth needed new places for its growing population to live and thrive. The ship moved slowly through space, near a gas giant with 12 moons. Dr. Lisa Carter was studying strange energy readings from the third moon when something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to bend and twist like water, and then massive ships appeared from nowhere. These were not metal ships like humans built, but looked alive with smooth curved surfaces that pulsed with blue and green lights. Jake had never seen anything like them. The alien vessels were enormous and moved without making any sound that their sensors could detect. There were 5 of them, and each one was bigger than 3 human battleships put together. The organic-looking hulls reminded him of deep-sea creatures from Earth, with their flowing shapes and bioluminescent patterns. Security Chief Ryan Blake immediately went to battle stations and prepared the weapons, but Jake told him to wait. Something about the alien ships felt different from the hostile encounters they had trained for. The ships moved closer, but did not attack or show any threatening behavior. Instead, they simply surrounded the human vessel in a perfect formation. Then came the message that changed everything. It arrived not through their communication systems, but directly into their minds through some kind of telepathic transmission. The voice was calm and spoke perfect English with no accent or emotion. It said, "Greetings, new species," and explained that humans had been selected for preservation and study. The voice assured them that resistance was not needed because they would be well cared for. Communications Officer Amy Rodriguez tried to respond, but found that their transmitters had been disabled by some invisible force. Engineer Tony Williams reported that all of their systems were being interfered with by an unknown energy field that seemed to come from the alien ships. The humans could still breathe and move, but they could not control their own vessel anymore. Aliens who called themselves the Zephyrian Collective began to board the human ship. They came through the walls as if the metal was not there at all. Jake watched in amazement as tall beings with crystal-like skin and multifaceted eyes like insects walked onto his bridge. They moved with grace and purpose, but showed no hostility toward the humans at all. One of the aliens approached Jake and spoke through a small device that translated thoughts into words. The being identified itself as Curator HFY 9 and explained that humans were the 847th species to be added to their grand collection. The alien seemed genuinely pleased to meet them and spoke as if he was welcoming guests to his home rather than capturing prisoners. Dr. Lisa Carter tried to ask questions about their intentions, but found herself unable to move as a gentle paralysis. Fields surrounded her body. The same thing happened to all the humans on the ship. They remained conscious and could see and hear everything, but could not resist as the aliens began to transport them to a new location. The process felt strange, like being dissolved and then put back together again. When the humans could move again, they found themselves in what appeared to be a perfect recreation of Earth. There were rolling green hills covered with familiar trees and grass. A small ocean sparkled under artificial sunlight, and birds that looked exactly like those from home flew overhead. The air smelled fresh and clean and felt exactly like a spring day on their homeworld. But Jake noticed the transparent dome far above them that enclosed their new environment. They were in a habitat like animals in a zoo, and the realization made his stomach turn with anger and frustration. The space was large enough for thousands of people, but it was still a prison, no matter how beautiful it might be. Curator HFY 9 appeared among them and began to explain the rules of their new existence. He told them that they would be studied and protected for all time, and that every need would be met. Food would appear when they were hungry, and the weather would always be perfect. All they had to do was live their lives while the Zephyrians learned about human culture and behavior. Alien explained that this was an act of mercy, because most species eventually destroyed themselves through war or environmental damage. The Zephyrians had decided to save promising species by giving them perfect homes where they could never come to harm. He spoke as if he was doing them the greatest favor possible. Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same determination in their eyes that had driven humans to explore the stars in the first place. The Zephyrians had made a serious mistake if they thought humans would accept captivity even in paradise. Captain Morrison realized that their real mission was just beginning, and it would be the hardest fight of their lives. 6 months had passed since the humans arrived at what the Zephyrians called Sanctuary Station. Jake Morrison had learned much about their beautiful prison during this time. The habitat was perfect in every way, with comfortable homes that appeared whenever someone needed shelter and food that materialized based on whatever they wished to eat. The temperature never changed from a pleasant 22 degrees, and it never rained unless someone specifically wanted it to rain. Dr. Lisa Carter had become fascinated with the other species that lived in similar habitats around the station. Through the transparent barriers, she could see the Delphini, who looked like intelligent dolphins and spent their time swimming in crystalline pools while singing mathematical equations. There were also the Christic, who appeared to be made of living silicon and communicated by changing the colors of light that flowed through their bodies like blood. Each species had been collected by the Zephyrians for the same reason. They had shown promise, but were heading toward destruction on their homeworlds. The Delphini had been saved when rising ocean levels threatened to flood their civilization. The Christic were rescued when their star began to die, and they seemed unable to find a way to escape their doomed planet. Communications Officer Amy Rodriguez discovered something disturbing about their habitat. Every conversation was being monitored and recorded by invisible sensors. Even their thoughts were being studied when they slept through devices that could read brain patterns. The Zephyrians believed that privacy was a dangerous concept that led to secrets, and secrets led to conflict and violence. Engineer Tony Williams spent his time mapping the incredible technology that kept their habitat functioning. The life support systems were biological rather than mechanical, with living organisms that processed air and water. The artificial sun above them was actually a controlled fusion reaction that had been ongoing for thousands of years without any maintenance needed. But Williams noticed something that worried him. The other species showed signs of what he recognized as giving up. They had stopped trying to improve their lives or create new things. Instead, they simply existed day after day, doing the same activities over and over again. The Zephyrians called this adaptation, but Williams called it the slow death of the spirit. Medical officer Dr. Karen Brooks had been studying the psychological effects of captivity on the various species. What she found made her angry and sad at the same time. The beings who had been in the habitats longest showed clear signs of depression and learned helplessness. They had forgotten how to hope for anything beyond their daily routine of eating and sleeping and basic entertainment. A Christic had once been master engineers who built wonders across their star system. Now they spent their days creating simple light patterns that meant nothing. The Delphini had been explorers who mapped the deepest parts of their world's oceans. Now they swam in circles in pools that were too small for their minds, even though they were large enough for their bodies. Curator HFY 9 visited the humans regularly to check on their progress toward accepting their situation. He seemed genuinely puzzled by their continued questions about freedom and choice. A concept made no sense to him because freedom meant the possibility of making wrong decisions that could lead to suffering or death. Why would anyone choose uncertainty when they could have perfect safety instead? Dr. Morrison tried to explain that humans needed challenges and risks to feel truly alive. Without the possibility of failure, there could be no real success, and without struggle, there could be no growth. The alien listened politely, but clearly did not understand. To the Zephyrians, growth meant expansion, and expansion led to conflict. And conflict led to extinction. Security Chief Ryan Blake had been carefully observing the Zephyrians themselves during their visits. He noticed that they never acted as individuals, but always moved and spoke as if they were parts of a larger mind. They had achieved perfect unity by giving up the messy complications of personal desires and individual dreams. Blake realized that the aliens were not just their captors, but were prisoners of their own system of collective thinking. The humans began to understand that they were not just fighting for their own freedom, but for something much larger. Every species in the station was slowly losing what made them unique and special. The Zephyrians thought they were preserving life, but they were actually killing it by removing all the struggles and choices that gave life meaning. Dr. Carter made contact with some of the Delphini through the water systems that connected the habitats. She learned their mathematical language and began to teach them about human concepts of individual identity and personal choice. The response was immediate and exciting. The Delphini began to remember what they had lost and started asking questions about their homeworld that they had not thought about in decades. Navigator Helen Parker spent her time studying the stars visible through their dome and calculating possible escape routes. She knew that the other humans looked to her for hope that they might someday see the real sky again rather than this artificial one. Parker refused to let that hope die, even though escape seemed impossible with their current resources. Pilot Dan Cooper organized exercise programs to keep the humans physically ready for whatever opportunity might come. He understood that their bodies were the only tools they had left, and he was determined to keep those tools sharp. The Zephyrians found this behavior puzzling since there was no apparent need for physical fitness in their perfect environment. Jake Morrison began to see a pattern in how the aliens thought and acted. They had eliminated risk from their own lives so completely that they could not understand why other species might want something different. The challenge was not just to escape, but to show the Zephyrians that their way of preserving life was actually destroying everything that made life worth living. The humans refused to settle into the routine that had claimed every other species in the station. While the Zephyrians expected them to spend their days in simple activities like the others, that Jake Morrison organized his crew into work groups that kept their minds sharp and their skills ready. They held classes every day where crew members taught each other everything they knew about science and engineering and navigation. Navigator Helen Parker led astronomy sessions where she pointed to the real stars visible beyond their dome and spoke about the worlds that humans had not yet explored. She drew maps in the dirt showing the positions of nearby star systems and calculated travel times to planets that might welcome human colonies. The Zephyrians found this behavior strange since the humans would never need such knowledge in their perfect habitat. Pilot Dan Cooper ran fitness programs that kept everyone in fighting shape, even though there seemed to be nothing to fight. He organized races and games that tested reflexes and coordination and strength. When the aliens questioned why physical conditioning was necessary, Cooper told them that humans needed to feel capable and strong to be mentally healthy. Dr. Lisa Carter made her most important discovery during her third month of studying the habitat barriers. The transparent walls were not completely solid, but allowed certain types of energy to pass through at specific frequencies. Working carefully with engineer Tony Williams, she developed a way to send simple signals to the other species in nearby enclosures. The process was slow and required great patience. Carter would stand near the barrier at the same time each day and use reflected light to send coded messages to the Christic habitat. The silicon-based beings were naturally sensitive to light patterns and began to respond with their own signals. After weeks of careful communication, Carter learned that the Christic had retained more of their original nature than the Zephyrians realized. Williams discovered that the station's infrastructure was more complex than their captors had revealed. The life support systems for all habitats were connected through a network of biological conduits that carried air and water and nutrients throughout the massive structure. More importantly, these conduits could carry other things, including sound waves and chemical signals, if someone knew how to use them properly. Communications. Officer Amy Rodriguez worked with the Delphini to develop a communication system based on their mathematical songs. The aquatic beings could send complex patterns through the water systems that connected their habitat to others throughout the station. These mathematical sequences could carry coded information about plans and ideas and hopes for something better. In endless captivity, the breakthrough came when Rodriguez realized that mathematics was a universal language that every intelligent species could understand. The equations for basic physics and chemistry were the same whether you lived in water, or crystal, or flesh. By embedding messages in mathematical proofs, the captive species could share ideas without the Zephyrians understanding what was really being communicated. Security. Chief Ryan Blake had been studying the aliens themselves and made a crucial observation. The Zephyrians showed no signs of individual creativity or innovation. They maintained their technology perfectly, but had not invented anything new in thousands of years. Their collective consciousness had achieved stability by eliminating the chaos and unpredictability that led to breakthrough discoveries. This gave Blake an idea that he shared with Jake Morrison during one of their evening walks around the habitat. The humans represented everything the Zephyrians had evolved beyond, including individual initiative and creative problem-solving and the willingness to take risks for uncertain rewards. They were not just prisoners, but living reminders of what the aliens had given up to achieve their perfect society. Medical Officer Dr. Karen Brooks made another disturbing discovery about the long-term effects of the preservation system. Species that had been in the habitats for more than a few centuries showed signs of genetic drift and loss of essential characteristics. The Zephyrians were so focused on preventing extinction that they had not noticed they were causing a different kind of death through gradual loss of what made each species unique. The most shocking example was a species called the Vorthen, who had once been warriors and explorers, but were now docile and passive after 500 years in captivity. There, young were born without the aggressive drive that had once made them great builders and discoverers. The preservation process was slowly breeding out the very traits that had made them worth preserving in the first place. Jake Morrison began to understand that the stakes were higher than just human freedom. The Zephyrians had created a system that was slowly killing the spirit of every species they claimed to be protecting. The beautiful habitats were not arcs of salvation, but slow-motion death chambers, where entire civilizations were forgetting how to be themselves. The humans started spreading their ideas more boldly through the growing communication network. They taught other species about concepts like individual rights and personal choice, and the value of uncertainty and risk. The response was immediate and powerful as beings who had forgotten how to dream began to remember what they had lost. HFY 9 noticed the changes and became concerned. Several species were showing what he called adjustment difficulties, including refusal to accept provided food and attempts to modify their habitats and questions about family members left behind. On their homeworlds, the collective decided that therapeutic interventions might be necessary to help the affected beings return to healthy adaptation patterns. The first victim was an Aquarian diplomat who had been working with Dr. Carter to establish better communication between species. The being was taken for treatment and returned 3 days later with empty eyes and no memory of their previous conversations about freedom and choice. The humans watched in horror as someone they had begun to consider a friend became a hollow shell of their former self. Morrison called an emergency meeting with his senior staff in a location they had confirmed was not monitored by Zephyrian sensors. The time for slow progress had ended. They needed to act quickly before more beings were broken by the aliens' therapeutic interventions. The choice was simple: risk everything in one desperate attempt at freedom, or watch as their new friends were systematically destroyed by the very beings who claimed to be protecting them. The communication network that Dr. Lisa Carter had carefully built over months of patient work began to show real results. 17 different species across the station were now connected through the hidden system of signals and coded messages. The network was fragile and required perfect timing, but it was growing stronger every day as more beings remembered what it meant to hope for something better than comfortable imprisonment. The Vorthen were the first species to truly understand what the humans were trying to accomplish. These beings had once been mighty warriors who conquered 3 star systems before the Zephyrians decided to save them from their own aggressive nature. Their leader was a massive creature with 4 arms and skin like armor, who the humans called Ironclad because of his metallic appearance and unbreakable will. Ironclad had been in captivity for over 400 years, but something about the human message awakened memories he thought were lost forever. He began organizing his people for something the Zephyrians considered impossible, which was active resistance to their perfect system. The Vorthens started refusing their provided meals and demanding to know what had happened to their homeworld and the billions of people they had left behind. Dr. Carter made another breakthrough when she realized that the Christic could carry information through the station's crystalline infrastructure. The silicon-based beings communicated through light patterns that traveled through the same crystal networks that helped maintain the habitat systems. Working together, the humans in Christic created a hidden data network that could span multiple habitats without being detected by Zephyrian monitoring systems. The aquatic Delphini proved crucial when engineer Tony Williams discovered that all the habitat water systems were connected through a central processing facility. The mathematical songs that the Delphini used for communication could carry complex instructions through these pipes and reach species and habitats that were too far away for other forms of contact. For the first time in centuries, different species were talking to each other without their captors knowing about it. Communications Officer Amy Rodriguez worked with a brilliant Delphini mathematician to develop a code based on universal physical constants. The messages looked like innocent discussions about science and mathematics, but actually contained detailed plans for coordinated resistance activities. The beauty of the system was that even if the Zephyrians intercepted the messages, they would only see academic conversations about abstract concepts. But the awakening came with terrible costs that made the humans question whether they were doing the right thing. Several species began experiencing what the Zephyrians called adjustment failures, where individuals refused to eat or sleep or participate in their normal daily activities. Some beings tried to damage their habitat barriers with their bare hands, while others simply sat motionless for days at a time. The Zephyrians responded with increased monitoring and what they termed therapeutic interventions. Beings who showed signs of adjustment problems were taken away for treatment that the aliens claimed would help them return to healthy mental states. When these individuals returned, they were changed in ways that horrified everyone who knew them. Aquarian Diplomat had been brilliant and curious with a mind that asked questions about everything. After treatment, he was docile and empty, with no interest in anything beyond basic survival needs. The Christic engineer who had helped develop the light-based communication system came back unable to create any patterns more complex than simple geometric shapes. The therapeutic interventions were essentially lobotomies that removed everything that made these beings who they were. Jake Morrison faced the hardest decision of his life as he watched friends and allies disappear into the treatment centers. The humans could continue their slow work of awakening other species, but every day brought the risk that more beings would be broken by Zephyrian therapy. Or they could accelerate their plans and attempt something desperate that might free everyone or get them all killed in the process. Security. Chief Ryan Blake had been studying the station's construction and had noticed something important about the habitat domes. They were not just barriers to keep the species contained, but were also structural components that helped support the massive station itself. If enough habitats experienced simultaneous failures, the damage might cascade through the entire system and create opportunities for escape. Medical officer Dyer Karen Brooks had a different idea based on her observations of Zephyrian psychology. The aliens had achieved their collective consciousness by eliminating individual doubt and uncertainty. If enough conflicting information entered their shared mental network at the same time, it might paralyze their decision-making process and give the prisoners time to act. Navigator Helen Parker had been calculating the station's position relative to nearby star systems and had identified several worlds that might welcome refugees from the Zephyrian collection. The key was getting enough functional spacecraft to carry the thousands of beings who would need transportation if the escape attempt succeeded. Pilot Dan Cooper had the most dangerous job of all, which was studying the Zephyrian ships that docked with the station regularly. These vessels were biological constructs rather than mechanical devices, but they still needed to follow basic principles of physics and engineering. Cooper believed that some of the smaller ships could be captured and reprogrammed if they could get past the alien security systems. Engineer Williams had been working on improvised tools and weapons created from everyday objects in their habitat. The Zephyrians had provided everything the humans needed for comfortable living, but had not considered that creative minds could turn household items into instruments of rebellion. Simple things like eating utensils could be modified into cutting tools, while decorative materials could be woven into ropes and nets. The plan that emerged from their desperate brainstorming was complex and required precise coordination across dozens of species and hundreds of individuals. Every habitat would need to act at exactly the same moment, while creating enough chaos to overwhelm the Zephyrian response systems. The timing would have to be perfect, because they would only get one chance before their captors implemented whatever final solution they had planned for troublesome species. Jake Morrison looked around at his crew and saw the same determination that had driven humans to leave Earth and explore the galaxy. They had come so far from home, only to end up in the most beautiful prison ever created. But they were still human, and humans had never accepted captivity willingly, no matter how comfortable it might be. The real question was whether they could convince enough other species to risk everything for the chance to choose their own fate. The rebellion required timing so precise that even a few seconds of delay could doom the entire plan. Navigator Helen Parker had calculated the exact positions of structural weak points throughout the station, while engineer Tony Williams designed improvised tools from materials that the Zephyrians had never imagined could be dangerous. Every piece of furniture and decoration in their habitat had been quietly converted into potential weapons or tools over the past month of careful preparation. The humans had become teachers in the most important lesson of their lives, showing other species that their provided items could serve purposes far beyond what their captors intended. Simple eating bowls could be shaped into cutting implements, while decorative crystals could focus light into burning beams. Even the soft bedding materials could be braided into strong ropes, capable of supporting body weight during climbs through maintenance tunnels. The Zephyrians detected unusual activity throughout the station, but their collective consciousness interpreted the changes as another periodic adjustment phase that some species experienced before accepting their circumstances. Their databases contained records of similar unrest that had eventually resolved itself through patience and therapeutic intervention. They increased monitoring but maintained confidence that their containment systems could handle any temporary difficulties. Dr. Lisa Carter had made a crucial discovery about how the Zephyrian collective mind actually worked. The aliens shared all thoughts and emotions through their neural network, which made them incredibly efficient at coordinating complex tasks. But this same system became vulnerable when too much conflicting information entered the network simultaneously. Like a computer processing too many contradictory commands at once, their decision-making could freeze completely if overwhelmed with impossible choices. The rebellion began at exactly 3 in the morning station, time when most Zephyrian observers were in their rest cycle, and monitoring was reduced to automated systems. The Vorthen struck first, using their natural strength to damage support pillars in their habitat while creating enough noise to trigger emergency alerts. Throughout their section of the station, Ironclad led his people in a coordinated assault. That looked chaotic, but followed a carefully planned sequence designed to maximize structural damage. The Christic created brilliant focused light beams that overloaded sensor networks across 12 different sectors. Their silicon-based bodies could generate and direct electromagnetic energy in ways that the station designers had never anticipated. The light bursts not only blinded monitoring systems, but also carried coded signals that triggered simultaneous actions by species in distant habitats who had been waiting for this exact moment. Security. Chief Ryan Blake led teams of humans through maintenance tunnels that the aliens had assumed were too small for most species to navigate. The Zephyrians had designed their station for their own tall bodies and had not considered that smaller beings might use these spaces as highways. Blake and his people moved like ghosts through the infrastructure, disabling critical systems and opening pathways for other species to follow. Medical Officer Dr. Karen Brooks had created biological agents from modified food supplies that could disable Zephyrian monitoring equipment without causing permanent damage. The aliens used living components in their technology, and these biological systems could be confused by introducing unexpected chemical signals. Brooks' compounds spread through air circulation systems, creating dead zones where the rebellion could operate without being observed. The Delphini mathematical songs reached their crescendo as the aquatic beings coordinated the massive assault. Through their acoustic network, their equations carried precise timing signals through water systems to species who had never communicated directly, but understood the universal language of mathematics. Even beings who had been isolated for centuries suddenly knew exactly when to act and what role they needed to play. Communications. Officer Amy Rodriguez managed to reach the station's primary communication array and began broadcasting a message that would reach other Zephyrian facilities throughout the galaxy. Her transmission was not just words, but a complex signal that carried the mathematical proofs of the Delphini and the light, poetry of the Christic, and the war songs of the Vorthen. It was a declaration of independence, written in dozens of languages, but with one unified meaning that could not be misunderstood. Curator. HFY 9 found himself facing something that had never happened in thousands of years of Zephyrian history. Dozens of species were acting together in ways that their models said were impossible. Beings who had been docile for centuries were suddenly displaying creativity and cooperation that challenged every assumption about preserved civilizations. Worse, yet they were succeeding in ways that made no sense according to established probability. Calculations. The habitat barriers began failing one by one as species that had seemed helpless proved they had only been waiting for the right moment to act. The transparent domes that had contained them for so long shattered under coordinated assault from inside and outside simultaneously. Pressure differentials that should have been fatal were countered by emergency systems that the rebels had learned to manipulate during months of careful study. Pilot. Dan Cooper led a desperate assault on the Zephyrian docking bay, where several small bioships were connected to the station for routine maintenance. The organic vessels responded to neural commands rather than mechanical controls, But Cooper had learned enough about their systems to attempt a hijacking. His team moved with military precision born from months of secret training and combat techniques that the Zephyrians had assumed were no longer needed by civilized beings. As species poured into the station corridors, Jake Morrison realized they had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had not just started a rebellion, but had created a new form of cooperation between different forms of life. The awakening had spread far beyond what any of them had hoped with beings throughout the station, remembering what it meant to choose their own destiny rather than accepting the choices made for them by others. The cascade failure exceeded even Engineer Williams' most optimistic projections as more habitats breached their barriers and emergency systems struggled to compensate for damage on such a massive scale. The Zephyrians found their collective decision-making process paralyzed by conflicting data streams and variables that had never existed in their previous experience. For the first time in millennia, they faced a crisis that their perfect system could not immediately resolve through standard procedures. The station shook as more habitat barriers failed and emergency systems struggled to maintain life support for thousands of species suddenly free from their enclosed worlds. But instead of the chaos and violence that Zephyrian models predicted, something remarkable happened. The free beings did not attack each other or rampage through the corridors. Instead, they organized themselves using the cooperation principles that the humans had taught them over months of secret communication. Dr. Lisa Carter found herself serving as an ambassador between species who had never interacted outside their artificial habitats. The Christic communicated through light patterns, while the Delphini used mathematical songs, and the Vorthon spoke in growling sounds that shook the air. But somehow they managed to understand each other through the universal languages of mathematics and shared purpose and the simple desire to be free. The coordination was imperfect and sometimes dangerous, but it worked better than anyone had dared hope. The Christic used their light manipulation abilities to guide other species through dark corridors, while the Delphini provided acoustic maps of the station layout through their song calculations. The Vorthon used their strength to clear blocked passages and protect smaller beings from falling debris as the station continued to shake from structural damage. Engineer Tony Williams worked with alien counterparts to stabilize critical life support systems that were failing under the stress of the massive breakout. The irony was not lost on him that they were now working to preserve the same station they had tried to destroy, but the goal had changed from escape to survival for everyone aboard, including their former captors. Curator HFY 9 experienced something his species had not felt in thousands of years, which was genuine fear and uncertainty. As he watched beings he had considered primitive solve engineering problems that challenged Zephyrian technology, he began to question fundamental assumptions about intelligence and evolution, and what it meant to be truly civilized. The station central core housed a collective governing council made up of ancient Zephyrians who had overseen the preservation project since its beginning. Jake Morrison led a delegation representing 12 different species to meet with these beings and present an alternative to the system that had imprisoned them all. The humans came not as conquerors, but as teachers offering a different vision of what preservation could mean. Morrison stood before the council and spoke words that had been carefully chosen to challenge everything the Zephyrians believed about safety and growth and the meaning of life itself. He told them that they had preserved bodies while destroying spirits and maintained physical health while causing psychological death. The beautiful habitats were not arcs of salvation, but museums where living beings were turned into exhibits of what they had once been. The council response revealed the tragedy at the heart of Zephyrian civilization. They had once been explorers and creators and dreamers who built wonders across the galaxy. But after witnessing the destruction that followed progress, including wars and extinctions and the collapse of entire civilizations, they had chosen safety. over growth and preservation over possibility. They had traded their souls for the promise that nothing would ever change again. Dr. Karen Brooks presented her medical findings about the psychological damage caused by prolonged captivity and the slow death of essential characteristics that made each species unique. The preserved beings were not adapting to their circumstances, but were gradually forgetting how to be themselves. The therapy that the Zephyrians used to treat adjustment problems was actually accelerating this process by removing the last traces of individual will and creative thinking. Navigator Helen Parker offered star charts, showing dozens of worlds where young civilizations were developing and facing the same challenges their own species had overcome. She argued that the Zephyrians could guide these societies without imprisoning them and share their vast knowledge without taking away the right to make choices, even if some of those choices led to mistakes or temporary setbacks. The breakthrough came when the Delphini mathematician presented equations that demonstrat how diversity and controlled risk actually increased long-term survival rates compared to static preservation. The mathematical proofs were elegant and beautiful, and completely undeniable even to minds that had spent millennia believing the opposite. The numbers showed that civilizations needed challenge and uncertainty to remain truly alive. Communications officer Amy Rodriguez had established contact with other Zephyrian facilities throughout the galaxy and was broadcasting the rebellion. Success to preserve species on hundreds of other stations. The message carried hope to beings who had forgotten that escape was possible and sparked similar uprisings across the vast network of galactic zoos that the collective had created. The Council made a decision that sent shockwaves through the collective consciousness and changed the course of galactic history. They would transform their preservation system from forced captivity into voluntary cooperation. Species could choose to remain on the stations or leave to rebuild their homeworlds, or work together on projects that balanced growth with wisdom gained from experience. Pilot Dan Cooper successfully hijacked 3 Zephyrian bioships and was learning to interface with their living control systems. The vessels responded to neural commands, but required a delicate touch that combined technical knowledge with something like empathy for the organic components. Cooper found that the ships actually wanted to fly and explore rather than just transport specimens between controlled environments. As the U's Horizon crew prepared to return to human space, Jake Morrison looked back at the station that had become something unprecedented in galactic history. Sanctuary Station was no longer a zoo, but had transformed into a community where beings chose their own level of participation rather than having safety imposed upon them by others who claimed to know what was best. The humans had done more than escape from their beautiful prison. They had taught an entire galaxy that the spirit of exploration and growth and individual choice was not a flaw to be corrected, but a gift to be shared. Some species chose to return to their homeworlds carrying new knowledge and perspectives, while others remained to work on collaborative projects that no single civilization could accomplish alone. 3 years later, Sanctuary Station had become the galaxy's first truly voluntary research collective, where former prisoners worked as equals with Zephyrian scientists to explore questions that neither group could answer alone. The station that had once been symbol of beautiful captivity had become a beacon of hope, showing that freedom and safety could coexist when people were allowed to choose their own path through the stars.